For nearly 25 years in Washington, one question followed Senator Lindsey Graham everywhere he went. It had nothing to do with elections or policy. People wanted to know why he never married. He was never seen with a wife at public events. There was no fiancé. No family story. Whenever reporters asked, he usually laughed it off with a joke. But after his sudden death at the age of 71, that silence finally came to an end. His younger sister shared the truth. And what she revealed changed the way many people looked at his entire life. But to understand her answer, we have to go back to where everything began. Lindsey Olin Graham was born on July 9, 1955, in the small town of Central, South Carolina. His parents, Millie and Florence James Graham, owned a local business called the Sanitary Cafe. It was more than a restaurant. It also included a bar, a pool hall, and a liquor store. In the early years, the family even lived in rooms behind the business before moving into a small house next door. As a boy, Lindsey spent countless hours helping his parents, learning the value of hard work long before anyone imagined he would one day serve in the United States Senate. But life was about to test him in ways no young man could ever expect. And what happened next would shape every decision he made for decades. He became the first person in his family to attend college, enrolling at the University of South Carolina. Like many students, he expected a normal future. Then everything changed. In 1976, his mother died from Hodgkin lymphoma. Just 15 months later, his father suffered a fatal heart attack. In barely more than a year, both parents were gone. Lindsey was only 20 years old. His little sister, Darlene, was just 11. There were no wealthy relatives ready to take over. No easy solution waiting in the background. Suddenly, a college student found himself responsible for a grieving child. Most people at that age are trying to discover who they are. Lindsey had to become someone else's parent instead. But would he really take on that enormous responsibility? He did exactly that. Rather than send Darlene to live with distant relatives, he chose to keep her close and raise her himself. It was a decision that would define his life far more than any election victory ever could. While finishing college and later attending law school, he became the person his sister depended on every single day. Friends later said the tragedy forced him to grow up almost overnight. The carefree years of youth disappeared. In their place came duty, sacrifice, and responsibility. Those qualities stayed with him for the rest of his life. But balancing school and parenting was only the beginning. An even bigger challenge was waiting. After earning his law degree, Graham entered the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps. In 1982, he began active military service. To make sure Darlene would receive military healthcare and benefits, he legally adopted his own sister. From that moment on, he wasn't simply acting like a guardian. He became her legal parent. Darlene would later say that neither of them questioned the arrangement. It simply became their life. While other young adults were dating, getting married, or starting families, Lindsey was helping raise a teenager who had lost both parents. It wasn't a symbolic act. It meant school problems, emotional struggles, daily routines, and countless responsibilities that most people never see. But could he keep all of that together while building a military career? For 33 years, Graham served in the Air Force and Air Force Reserve. During his active duty years, he worked as both a military prosecutor and defense attorney. For part of that time, he was stationed at Rhein-Main Air Base in Germany. Being thousands of miles away made raising his sister even more difficult. Whenever possible, he returned home to check on her progress and relied on trusted family friends to help while he was overseas. Those who knew the family said Darlene never lacked guidance or support. Lindsey made sure of that, even from another continent. His commitment left very little room for romance. Looking back, it becomes easier to understand why marriage never became his priority. But the story didn't stop there. Years later, when Graham announced his campaign for president in 2015, he and Darlene quietly stopped at their parents' graves before making the official announcement. The night before, she returned to the old pool room above their childhood home for the first time in nearly 30 years. Friends said the memories overwhelmed her. It reminded both of them how everything had started. Eventually, Darlene explained publicly that her brother simply devoted the years when most people build families to raising her instead. She said he was trying to finish school while taking care of a young girl who had nowhere else to go. In that single explanation, decades of public curiosity suddenly made perfect sense. But while his private life stayed quiet, his public career was just beginning. Graham first worked as an assistant attorney in Oconee County before becoming city attorney for Central, South Carolina. In 1992, he won a seat in the South Carolina House of Representatives. 2 years later, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Then, in 2002, he entered the United States Senate, succeeding longtime Senator Strom Thurmond. Over the years, he won re-election several times and became one of Washington's most recognizable Republicans. Yet one friendship stood above all others. And that relationship would shape much of his national reputation. His closest political ally was Senator John McCain of Arizona. Along with Senator Joe Lieberman, the three became known around Washington as the Three Amigos. They often worked together on defense and foreign policy issues. McCain once joked that he had watched Graham date many attractive women over the years but had never seen him come close to getting married. The comment reflected genuine affection between two longtime friends. When McCain was diagnosed with brain cancer in 2017, Graham helped inform fellow senators about the devastating news. After McCain passed away the following year, Graham remained close to the family, continuing to visit and offer support long after the headlines disappeared. But while those friendships drew attention, his political positions often sparked even bigger debates. Throughout his Senate career, Graham became known for working across party lines, especially on immigration reform. He partnered with Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy to push for legislation that combined stronger border security with changes to the immigration system and a path to legal status for many undocumented immigrants under strict conditions. Supporters praised his willingness to compromise. Critics argued the proposals went too far. Years later, he became one of the Republican leaders behind the bipartisan Gang of Eight immigration bill in 2013. The Senate approved it, but the House never passed it. Even so, Graham's role cemented his reputation as one of the Republican Party's most visible voices on immigration. But that was only one part of his legacy. Drawing on his military background, Graham consistently argued for a strong American military and active leadership overseas. He traveled repeatedly to Iraq and Afghanistan to meet with troops and military leaders. Later, after Russia invaded Ukraine, he made several visits there as well, insisting that American support was important for international security. Whether discussing NATO, China, terrorism, or the Middle East, his views remained remarkably consistent throughout his career. Supporters admired that consistency. Critics believed he was too willing to support military involvement abroad. Whatever people thought of his policies, few questioned his commitment. Yet one question about his personal life simply refused to disappear. When Graham ran for the Republican presidential nomination in 2016, reporters repeatedly asked who would serve as First Lady if he became president. Instead of becoming irritated, he usually responded with humor. He joked about the situation and kept the conversation moving. Very few people realized those jokes covered a deeply personal story that he rarely shared. At the same time, his political identity was changing. During the 2016 campaign, he harshly criticized Donald Trump, even calling him a race-baiting bigot after Trump's proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States. Trump responded by publicly revealing Graham's cell phone number during a rally. Yet politics has a way of surprising everyone. What happened after that caught many people off guard. Following John McCain's death in 2018, Graham gradually became one of Trump's closest allies in the Senate. The shift transformed his public image. From 2019 to 2021, he chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, playing a major role in confirming federal judges. Later, he became chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, remaining active in national debates until the very end of his life. Then, in July 2026, everything suddenly stopped. Lindsey Graham died on July 11, 2026, after what was first described as a brief illness. A preliminary medical examination later suggested a torn aorta linked to hardened arteries, a condition that can remain hidden until it suddenly becomes fatal. The news shocked Washington because he had recently returned from an overseas trip and still had major public appearances planned. Tributes arrived from both political parties. Meghan McCain described him as family. Others remembered his decades of public service and military commitment. Yet among all those messages, one voice mattered more than any other. Darlene Graham Nordun finally explained why her brother had never married. Now a mother herself, she said Lindsey made a promise when they lost their parents. He told her he would take care of her. And he never broke that promise. According to her, raising his little sister became more important than building a family of his own. He never treated it as a burden. He simply accepted it as his responsibility and lived by that decision for the rest of his life. After his death, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster appointed Darlene to complete the remainder of her brother's Senate term. Standing in Washington to take the oath of office, she said her brother had always been there for her, and now she hoped to honor him in return. It was a remarkable full circle. More than 50 years earlier, a 20-year-old college student had promised an 11-year-old girl that she would never be alone. That promise carried them through law school, military service, decades in the Senate, and finally back to the very place where his public life had ended. In the end, there was no hidden scandal. No secret relationship. No mystery waiting to be uncovered. The answer was far simpler, and perhaps far more powerful. Lindsey Graham never married because he had already devoted himself to a family. Long before Washington knew his name, he had chosen to raise his younger sister after tragedy tore their family apart. Every joke about bachelorhood, every light-hearted answer to reporters, and every unanswered question quietly rested on that single decision. It was a sacrifice made without fanfare, kept private for decades, and finally revealed only after he was gone. Sometimes the stories that stay hidden the longest are not the ones filled with scandal. They are the ones built on love, duty, and a promise that never faded.